Okay, as promised, this is my vlog on Jeffery Epstein. I was challenged by one of my fairly new subscribers if I would answer the question, is Jeffery Epstein dead? So I always like to rise to these challenges. So if you're watching my vlog for the very first time, you don't know a lot about me. What I do here is I discuss a lot of political, ideological, and philosophical issues, and attached to that are always my predictions as an astrologer. So not everyone who watches me is that interested in astrology. They're more interested in the other things. So I like to combine them together and then give an added perspective from astrology and predictions on what it can all mean. So let's look at this. Is Jeffery Epstein dead? So the very first thing I did when I wanted to look at that was I did a horary chart for the time of the question. And that question, the answer to that question was yes, indeed, he is dead. I think that makes logical sense, because why would they want to keep him alive? He's not a kingpin. He's only kind of a middleman, a procurer. Yes, he's done very well out of it. He might be a billionaire. He has a certain amount of power, but he's not really top level. And it's probably safer just for him to be dead. Whether he was killed, whether he hung himself and it was suicide, which we'll come to, it's probably a lot more convenient for him to be dead other than hiding. I mean, I know there was talk about over history, there's been talk of some people who weren't really dead, like there were theories that Hitler wasn't really dead, although in the Hitler diaries it appears that he was a very ill person towards that period anyway, and he wouldn't have survived much longer. And then there's Joseph Mengele, who a lot of people afterwards said was operating under the name of Dr. Green as part of the MK Ultra, and they say he was smuggled out. So there are always these stories about people, but I don't think Epstein is important enough to be one of these people who they're going to try and sort of move out and keep alive. So the next question is, let's have a look at his chart. So he's born January 20, 1953. He's an Aquarian. He's just an Aquarian because the sun has just gone into Aquarius. A couple of things really stood out in his chart. And the very first thing is that he has got Saturn conjunct Neptune in almost an exact square to Mercury. Yeah, so it's Saturn conjunct Neptune in Libra. It's almost an exact square to Mercury on 21 degrees of Capricorn, which is exactly where transiting Pluto is now. It's also in a square to his sun, which is just into Aquarius at 1 degree. I'm thinking that he is Capricorn ascendant with Mercury rising. Now, I've seen so many times in charts, and I'll give you 4 examples, where people have a Neptune-Saturn conjunction, which is strongly attached to either their sun, their ruling planet, their ascendant, or their midheaven, who were assassinated. So my examples are John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, Benazir Bhutto, and Indira Gandhi, all assassinated, and all had this Saturn-Neptune thing, very conjunction, closely aligned to one of their key planets, which he has, which kind of points me a little bit towards assassination, right? The other thing is the transits that were going on, but I'll come more to them. He has a Venus conjunct Mars in Pisces. This is very much a ladies' man, very high sex drive. Donald Trump said he loved women, especially very young ones, and I think that's epitomized by that aspect, because often Venus in Pisces loves the whole innocence, the youth. You know, they're very drawn to almost a childlike image in women. Something's very pure and innocent. It's what turns them on. Also demonstrates some sexual proclivities, along with his Pluto in the 8th house, which shows that as well. And a very high sex drive, you know, very highly sex person, very into women. So yes, that definitely seems like him. Sun in the 1st house, sure, he might have not been a famous in his own right, certainly comfortable moving around famous people, a very outgoing person, a very strong personality, someone who really aimed to be famous, to hobnob with the great and good, and probably would have done anything in order to get there. So there you go. Other important things I want to say, yes, Mercury in Capricorn on the ascendant. Now, apparently he had no college degree, but the next thing he managed to get himself in a position as a headmaster or master at a school teaching. So I don't know how you go from no degree to teaching. Mercury on the 1st, very much connected with teaching. He then jumps from that into being an international financier and becoming a billionaire. So I quite confused about the kind of trajectory of his his career path. It's similar in a way, like Jimmy Savile. He certainly didn't get anywhere on his looks, Jimmy Savile. I mean, quite an appalling looking man. You would have thought just the look of him would have warned people off. Sometimes monsters do look like monsters when it comes to Jimmy Savile, but he was kind of just a DJ. And then he was on a show called Jim Will Fix It. After that, he wasn't on television much, but he seemed to have masses and masses and masses of money and all this influence. And you're asking, where did it all come from? So he also has this kind of mismatch between what he appears to be doing and the kind of money he's raking in. The same with Jeffrey Epstein. However, with this Mercury in Capricorn and all that, and the Pluto in the 8th house of international finance, then I do think he was probably very at home moving into that world. Even if he had no qualifications, he could probably run with it. I was very interested that he had Pluto in the 8th house. Quite a few people in politics have that. It says to me that he knows people, be extremely powerful and can pull the right strings, and a lot of his wealth is very much connected to these influential people, and he almost performs a function with all these very influential people. Now, other people have Pluto in the 8th house, who I've looked at recently, are Hillary Clinton. Now, we know Hillary was always in politics. She didn't make her money by being a big business person. She made her money by being kind of the front person politically for special interests, for extremely powerful, wealthy people who could act via her, via the Clinton Foundation or, via the Democratic Party, and she could carry out what they wanted politically, right? And we also see it in Nigel Farage's chart, Pluto in the 8th, and he has access to an enormous amount of money, as you can see how much he's whipped up through the Brexit Party. So there are also powerful people behind him. And with this Epstein, very powerful people, Pluto in the 8th behind him, and they are very much connected to the way he's amassed his wealth. But it also means that he's only a kind of a procurer, a fixer, a middleman. When his use is up, then they throw him away. And so that was all about Pluto. Now, Pluto in the 8th also suggests that the death is more likely to be something like murder and violence rather than suicide. It also suggests that there would be a lot of mystery surrounding his death, which obviously there is. Mars was conjunct Pluto in the 8th at the time of his death. Pluto was conjunct Mercury, which squares up to those two planets, Neptune and Saturn conjunction, which, as I say, often symbolize assassinations. And Mercury was conjunct Venus conjunct Mars in Pisces in the 3rd house. So that also says to me that he has lots of dead man switches. He's put a lot of information out there, which is currently being suppressed, but which could emerge at any time. He was becoming dangerous because he was talking. I think Jeffrey Epstein knew in a way that his time was up and he was going to leak out as much as possible. So I see that there's an awful lot of information still out there that hasn't come to light, that he's seeded, that he's put out there. So if we have a look at the evidence, let's start by looking at the autopsy report, right? Now, the very interesting thing about, I'll just read, maybe I should read some comments quickly. Rega, when will marijuana become fully legal in the US? Well, really, that's not something I regularly look at because it doesn't concern me particularly, but I can have a look. Ghislaine Maxwell just might be shaking her neck because, yes, well, no one's seen her. Everyone's kind of wondering where she is. She hasn't been seen at her London, because apparently she was back living in London. She hasn't been seen there. She has an estate somewhere in the country near Salisbury. Funny, hey, Salisbury. It's also the place of, the Scripples and the other, forgetting his name. His name eludes me right now, but the other person who was linked to the dodgy dossier. Jonathan, your message was retracted. I don't know if you know that. What are your feelings about the Illuminati and everyone with tons of money a part of it? I'll come back to that, Dennis. You've done amazing prediction on Jeffrey Epstein. Oh yes, I don't actually know his birth time. I just rectified his chart partially by intuition and by looking at a few things. So that's my intuition on his chart. I've also rectified Joe Swinson's chart, which turned out to be quite interesting as well. So let me get back. The most interesting thing about the autopsy is they said bones were broken in his neck. Okay, not a bone, bones. Now this is one case where the plural makes all the difference. So there are 8 bones in your neck. 7 of them are part of your spine, and they are named C1 to C7, that's cervical 1 through cervical 7, and the hyoid bone, which is at the front here. Now, a hyoid bone is a U-shaped bone. It's the only bone in the whole body that isn't connected to other bones. It's connected to the muscles via ligaments, right? It's of a similar shape to the jaw. It's sometimes called the second jaw. And usually the hyoid bone, very, very often, if you watch murder mysteries, you'll know this too, like Silent Witness and the forensic ones, hyoid bone is usually always broken in strangulation, but not in hanging. Because if you think about hanging, as the rope comes around your neck, the rope pulls up, so the line of the rope would go up. It doesn't affect the hyoid bone, right? So the hyoid bone, as I say, is usually broken during strangulation. Often it can be broken in car accidents as well, if you go forward and crash into your steering wheel. But it's very easy for doctors to tell where the pressure was applied, because it's surrounded, like most bones, with a connective tissue. And where the connective tissue is broken, if you think of how strands of celery, if you break celery and you've got little strands sticking out, where the connective tissue is broken or is not continuous anymore, which you can see under a microscope, you would know where the pressure points are, and it's easy to tell if it was a frontal impact or if it was a squeezing. So definitely, hyoid bone break is very consistent with strangulation. But why were other bones broken? Now, in a study in India, they showed that only 6% of people who hang themselves actually break their necks. And even in the cases of the gallows, where, you know, they've got you all kitted out and the trapdoor opens and people fall from a dizzy height, even in that situation, people don't always break the C1 to C7 bones. For example, Abraham Lincoln's conspirators and murderers were tried. There were 4 of them. Only one of them broke her neck, it was a woman, when she was dropped in the gallows and hung. The other 3 didn't break their necks, even though they were like professionally hung. They didn't break their necks. So how's he broken his neck? And usually the very top bone, C1, it's like a sphere that's called the atlas. The very next bone is called the axis, and the sphere sits on top of that axis and it can swivel around on it. That's C1 and C2. Usually during hanging, it's C1 and C2 that break, and that kills you. Takes about a minute or 2, but it kills you. But even people like Robin Williams, who hung himself with a belt connected, closed into a door, he didn't break any muscles, but he asphyxiated himself. And most hanging people who hang themselves at home kind of thing would die of asphyxiation because the windpipe is constricted or damaged. They wouldn't die of a broken neck. The next place you can break your neck is on the C3, 4, 5. That would be an example of that would be Superman, Christopher, what's his name? Christopher, anyhow, sorry? No, Christopher, never mind. You guys are going to tell me what it was. Christopher, the guy who was Superman, he broke his neck in a riding accident, and he broke the C3, 4, 5, which is why he was not only paralyzed and a paraplegic, he also needed a ventilator to help him breathe, because if those bones are broken, you can't breathe because you can't control your lungs. When people break C4 and C5, they're usually a paraplegic. They might have a little use of their arms, but usually it's arms, legs, no movement down. But that doesn't often kill you. In Christopher Reeve, that's his name, Christopher Reeve's case, he would have needed medical attention quite quickly because he wouldn't have been able to breathe, but he obviously got it. So you can see there that most neck breaks require quite a lot of impact. So those muscles, the C1 to C7, are quite robust. They don't break easily, even if in a hanging. So why was why was Jeffrey Epstein got broken bones in his neck? So the hyoid for strangulation, how of the C1 to C5, which ones of the C1 to C7, why are they broken? How did they get broken? Only in terrible car accidents, really, did so much damage occur. It seems very difficult to believe he could have himself in the cell created that much damage. Plus, we have prisoners coming forward from that correctional facility saying it's almost impossible to do that in your cell. There are no fixtures or fittings or bars from which you can hang yourself. The sheets are almost made of a tissue kind of material, and they tear. They're not suitable. Apparently, the prison sort of kit or uniform that you have to wear is very constricting, so you don't have full movement of your arms and legs, which also limits the ability of yourself. to kill yourself. They give them rubber pens. Everything's sort of taken away. And I also heard that in this prison, it's been 21 years since anyone managed to kill themselves. There was kind of a mafia guy. And generally in federal prisons, suicides are extremely rare, even though the prison population are much more predisposed to want to commit suicide. The number of suicides is way down to the national average. When you hear stats about suicides in prison, it's usually county jail, city jail, where a lot more take place. But in federal prisons, it's set up with so many checks and balances. It's very hard to commit suicide. Plus, 2 weeks ago, apparently he claimed someone tried to kill him. He had bruises on his neck. He was put on suicide watch. He was taken off suicide watch the day before he actually died. And the guy who was his cellmate and who'd also been put there, because that's also a precaution they use for people on suicide watches to pair you up in the cell, that guy was removed 24 hours before, the same time he was taken off suicide watch. Also sounds very suspicious, doesn't it? Now, apparently there were cameras trained on the door going in and out of his prison cell. It would be very interesting. I think the family are now saying that they want to see, who went in and out. And I suppose they're going to say the cameras weren't working or whatever. Like they're already saying they were short-staffed, which is why they weren't doing checks every 15 to 30 minutes. So it seems that a lot of things failed. The other thing that people are suspicious about is when someone's on suicide watch, in order to take them off suicide watch, you have to have the signature of the shrink, the wardens, some of the prison guards, the kind of governor. I'm not sure, you wouldn't call it governor in America, but they sort of call it that over here. But lots of checks and balances. So lots of things had to have gone wrong in order for him to achieve suicide. And it seems unlikely that so much went wrong. Plus he achieves the almost impossible of killing himself when it's so unlikely. I mean, even in the general population, 90% of suicides fail. It's actually quite hard to kill yourself. And so he achieved that. Plus, he was able to do it because no one was watching him. So that's another thing there that you wonder about. So yes, it seems to me definitely that this is going to become one of the world's biggest conspiracies. No, it's going to be very difficult to get to the bottom of it, because within a prison situation, it's all very controlled, isn't it? Everyone who's either been put in those positions is probably in the know or has enough to lose not to want to speak out about it. So my conclusion is that it's probably a lot more likely, he's definitely dead. I don't think he's still alive and be smuggled out. Much more likely that he was killed rather than he committed suicide, because of the level of violence kind of it is suggested by the chart. And also in terms of the autopsy and the medical, it seems there's far too much damage, far too much breakage for anyone to have been able to do to themselves. Someone very strong obviously went into overkill in order to produce these injuries. And unless more comes out from the autopsy, because the family are wanting more independent autopsies, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense at all, those particular injuries. Okay, guys, I'll have a look at your comments. Maxwell was supposed to be seen in and out in LA reading her book on CI. Yes, on CI operations. Yeah, I'm sure. Reeves, thank you, Reeves. Yeah, I did. A few tarot readers read that he did not kill himself. It was done by his own people. Most of these readers got pretty freaked out and also said, we will never know. Yeah, well, you see, there's a lot of Neptune going on in his chart. I doubt we will ever know. All these things only emerge so many years later when everyone that cared about it has kind of died. They've got too much to protect, really. We had Jimmy Savile. Afterwards, it came out everything about him. And yet, who else? Was there any knock-on effect? Did they ever find anyone that was linked to Jimmy Savile who's been followed up? No. And we know Jimmy Savile was well in with the royals, with politicians, but there was no real fallout from that. It's all dead and buried, isn't it? Supposedly a woman very high up in the Illuminati will go down, but not for this crime, for something totally different. Is that what the tarot readers are saying, Dennis? Yeah, I don't know about a woman going down. I suppose that would be Ghislaine Maxwell. She's probably going to be the next, domino to fall in this whole saga. So it'll be quite interesting to see what happens. But I'm not holding my breath. I had a look at Prince Andrew's chart to see if there was any fallout, and no, I don't think so. So I won't be holding my breath about any big names being arrested in terms of this. He's dead. Dead men don't speak unless, and they're probably suppressing the information that his lawyers might hold in case it comes out. It's very, very hard. Someone asked me here if I think all rich people are involved in the Illuminati and that. I've been challenged on that a lot of times. And I think the word Illuminati, it makes it sound all like, funny handshakes. It's all Harry Potterish. It's got this weird name. It's reptilians. It's shapeshifters. That makes it all sound rather creepy and bizarre and unbelievable. But if you narrow it down and you think, what does economic theory say? Economic theory says that perfect competition is a world where there are so many producers that there are just too many of them to collude, and therefore you get a totally honest market because everyone's producing on their own. There's no collusion. But as soon as you get a small number of producers, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's a great possibility for collusion to happen. So even in economic theory, it recognizes that if you've got a small group of powerful people, collusion happens. Collusion versus conspiracy, very similar. So what do we have in the world? Most of us aren't players. We just hoi polloi. We have no influence. We know that at the top there's extremely rich people, billionaires, and extremely influential people if they're in politics. It only makes sense that these people would come together to discuss how to further their interests, perhaps in Bilderberg or some other avenue. So it really is just very rich and influential people getting together to discuss their interests and how to further their interests together. There's nothing really weird about it. It's almost logical that this should happen. So people who want to diss the Illuminati and say that they aren't sort of a batch of very influential people are denying the reality of life, because it happens whether in business or whatever. Collusion does happen. So yes, I think it probably does happen, but I think they can't always agree. There must be different strains of Illuminati who don't particularly, gel all the time. But yeah, I think it would be silly to fool ourselves that everything's happening on a micro level, and that at a macro level, there's just absolutely no collusion when we know things like Bilderberger and whatnot do happen. Of course, they're going to meet. Of course, they're going to coordinate. And I think it's pretty obvious when you look at politics right throughout the Western world and the huge amount of similarities and how we're all on the same trajectory. Some kind of collusion is happening. Note Satanism around the world. Well, probably, but you'd have to redefine Satanism. It's not just like pentagrams on the floor. It's possibly Aleister Crowley had a big influence and a lot of his occultism has seeped in. Or maybe the Satanism is connected to, I think it's connected to something we don't really understand. And just the word Satanism makes it seem something that's really hard to believe in, because it's connected to religion in a way. Lucifer and religion, it seems the opposite of Christianity or Jesus. And you put it into that context, it doesn't make sense. But if you put it into another context, maybe it does make sense. It might not really be Satanism, but yes, but an entirely different kind of philosophy where there are no morals, where might is right. Okay, American CIA, they're breaking up the CIA. Well, the CIA is like the enforcers for the Illuminati or the global elite, aren't they? I don't think they have anything to do particularly with the interests of American citizens. It's more like the interests of big business, which they try and protect, isn't that so? Yes, it's a horrible thought. Yeah, I think Satanism is probably linked more to rituals, and I think I don't want to get too much into this now because that's a whole other field. But I think what we don't realize on a kind of micro level is the power in rituals and possibly even in sacrifice. And maybe they do realize that certain people higher up, possibly linked to Aleister Crowley. We know that Hitler was very interested in Aleister Crowley. We know JPL and the development of rocket technology, which helped people get to the moon. The Americans get to the moon. The JPL industry and what would you call the JPL, Jack Parsons, he was connected strongly to Aleister Crowley, and he had a kind of institute in America where they developed the black powder that they used to launch rockets and whatnot that was linked to Crowley. So who knows what he knew, what he understood from extensive reading and understanding of ancient manuscripts. He might have understood a sort of what I would call a secret science that is not readily understood by ordinary people. And I think even with astrology, how easy is it for them to diss it and to make fun of it and to ridicule it? You could easily do that with all these ritualistic satanic things. You just ridicule it, say it's a lot of nonsense. Your average person believes, yeah, of course it's a lot of nonsense, because they don't understand the background. But maybe on some level, Satanism or whatever that actually represents to them, it's all the rituals, the sacrifice, and whatever they do. Maybe there is a power in it, in all the symbolism attached. And that's why it's a kind of whole part of our existence which we don't understand. It's a secret science which is being kept from people, because should we understand it, we could also access the good part of that power, and they access that power and use it for bad reasons. So I think it's partially because most of us don't have a very good understanding of history, and most of us are encouraged to believe science. And I always think it's a fallacy to believe science, because science doesn't follow the truth. Science follows the funding. Science follows the money. And most people subscribe and totally believe in science, thinking that it's always a slam dunk. And it's not. Science can be extremely subjective. It depends a lot on what your initial assumptions are, the hypotheses you make, and how you draw it together. And often the assumptions and the initial hypotheses totally influence the direction you go in. And that direction, of course, also determined by who's funding you and the kind of conclusions they want you to draw. So to totally rely on science, as we are encouraged to do, can also lead you down the garden path and could totally blind you to the power in ritualistic magic, not magic as in David Copperfield, but magic in an Aleister Crowley sense. I hope that all made sense, because that was totally off the cuff, guys. Hope you enjoyed my stuff on Epstein. I hope, bit of facts there. So, I think he's dead. Look, my opinion is he was definitely taken out from his chart. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. That was fun.